Hi, in this chapter we'll review one of the things that I like the most, and it's shading and texturing. I'd like to begin by pointing out again one of the advices I've been saying over and over again in this training, and it's to have references of what we want to do. As I said before, we're going to begin with texturing and shading, and we'll be talking about the watermelon and the melon that I think represents better the process we'll be doing here. As an example, here I have some pictures about a melon that I found on internet. And as you can see, the photograph is very close to the final result here in my image. And mainly this is because most of the texturing and shading work was done based on this specific photograph. Okay, so let's begin with the process which took me to this result. We'll first begin with a very simple scene, and that scene will give me a very simple representation on how things will look in their final stage. Someday someone gave me an advice, and is that a good shader will work almost perfectly on any scene, no matter their light or their complexity of it. Taking this as a cornerstone, we'll start with the process of shading and texturing with this simple file. And it should work almost the same in my final scene where all the fruits will be imported. Now let's take a look at the basic setup I have here. This simple scene is based on a 3-point light setup. Here you can see it. This is a very simple theory, and it announced that we need to have a key light, then we need a fill light here about 45 degrees from the key light, and then a backlight just in the back of the scene. This light at the back will help us to define many of the things that we can't see with the first two lights, with the principal lights. The type of light is not that important. It's more important where is the position of each light and the intensity also of each one. I'll be turning on each of the lights so you can see the final result. Here on this, that is my final model for the melon. And you can realize that it's a very simple model here. It's almost a sphere with just a couple of irregularities that we explore on the other chapters. So now I'll hit render so we can see the final result of this single light, that it's a V-Ray light. Okay, now I'll turn on this other light here, and you'll notice that it's a very subtle change but noticeable. But as you can see, it's just filling here with light these shadows that are in this side. And I'll turn on this backlight here, and it will create a rim of light here in this part of the object. Okay, here we have, and it's a very simple scene now. Remember that we have to be always in scale and with the usual light intensities. I've seen many scenes with extremely crazy values in the lights. So the advice here is that you always need coherent values in your lights. So the first thing we have to do, once we have this very simple basic setup, is to begin working with the texturing for this melon. So the first thing is what's the mapping of the fruit we have here. The mapping here was very simple. It was just a simple cylinder. Let's take a look at the unwrap here. So here it's the unwrapping. It's a simple cylinder again, and the reason is because it's a lot simpler to paint on an extended surface like this one. So you can paint the melon pattern and then put it back into Max. I will export the unwrap here so I can paint later using this as a guide with this pattern. We'll be rendering from here, and here I'll tell the size I want to export the unwrap. I'll hit render, and then this image I can save it somewhere else. I had this one already saved, so I'll be overwriting it. The next step is to open this texture in Photoshop, and we'll begin painting over this guide from the unwrap. Let me open one of the textures I really like the most that I got from the internet, and this is the one. This image gave me a very nice overview of what I wanted for the texture, and it has a very nice pattern here. I always prefer to have the unwrap as a guide over all the things that I'm going to be painting later. Well, the best way I've found to do this is to assign a difference mode in the layer here in Photoshop, and that will give it transparency and let me keep watching what I have below this guide. I'll delete the back here because I don't need it. Okay. And now the next step is to begin cloning here this texture so it appears that it's extended on the same way as the unwrap, and I'll do this with the stamp tool here. And I'll try to clone from this central part of the texture because I don't want this stretched thing that is going on the border in my texture. So we'll prioritize this central part. This is a very simple process, but it will give us a very nice result at the end of it. In a couple minutes, I'll explain how are we gonna add more detail to this texture, so don't be freaked out just to see this weird pattern coming out everywhere. Please notice that I'm trying to clone from this central part that was more stable and more clearly seen in the picture. And now we have this very decent result from this pattern from the general texture for the melon. So this is it for this general texture, and the next step will be how this looks applied on our melon in our scene we were looking a couple minutes ago. Okay, I'll turn off all of this thing, and I'll turn off also the unwrap because I won't be needing it anymore. And I'll turn on the Turbo Smooth that I commented that only have active in render time. Okay, at this point of the project I won't be taking much care of the shading parameters. I just want to see how the texture looks in the geometry mapped around it. Okay, I'll remove this checker texture and then I'll put my flat texture. Okay, I'll play the material and turn on this so we can see the texture in the viewport. And we have a fairly very useful result. I have some stretching over here, but we'll be dealing with it later. Don't worry. So, as you might be looking at, there is not much science here on making a texture for a sphere, but we need to make some details so we can make difference on other texturing for this kind of simple things. Okay, I'll make a render test here. And started, I think this is a very decent result, very good result here. But I can notice that we're missing some very important thing, and it's this green cap that the melon has on its side. As far as I know, all the melons have it, and it really needs it, so it looks better now. So now I think that with this cylindrical mapping we used, we might come out with some problems. So we to map this area. So let me just open the unwrap here to explain better what I'm talking about. So if you take a closer look, the part where the green cap of the melon would be, it's here, and would be here in the unwrap. And as you can see, it's also where the green part of the unwrap is, up here. So if I would pretend to paint a cap here in Photoshop, I'll be running into the problem that we'll be looking at the seam on each of these lines here. And here's where I want to begin to explain what was the solution I gave, the technique I used for solving this. I'll close this thing now. And to solve this problem, let's turn on now ZBrush. And the first thing we need to do is to export this model. Okay, I'll take out the unwrapping. So I'll be exporting this model as an OBJ, so ZBrush can read it and we can work on that. Okay, I'll import the recently exported OBJ from Max. And I'll click and drag so we can put it here in the canvas of ZBrush. As you can see, it's exactly the same model we have in Max. And now we'll try to paint. We'll be painting here so we can draw the caps, and with a technique that has been very helpful for me, and we'll be also clearing out some seams in the general model. So the first thing we'll be doing is to load up the texture, the flat texture we just painted in Photoshop. I'll click here in Textures, and Import Texture, and we'll select the one we just painted here. And well, we don't see it here in the viewport, but we have to activate it here in the texture part. And as you can see, now we have the texture. You can import it here, and we click here, and now we can see it on inside ZBrush. Now I'll select a different shader that doesn't interfere with the actual texture color. And in ZBrush, we're gonna we'll work only with the texture. We're not gonna touch anything about the model. I'll make some subdivisions here so we don't see all the facets here in the model. And now I'll start saying how are we gonna paint these caps inside ZBrush. The first thing we're gonna do is to find a view, a position in which we can see the area we want to paint. I'll use this side so I can paint my details now. And we're gonna be using a tool, a special tool that in fact is a plugin for ZBrush, and you have to download it from the web page. The plugin is called Sapling, and of course it's free for you to download it. This one is very simple to install. You just have to unpack it in the folder you have installed ZBrush, and we're gonna have this button. What the plugin does is that it takes sort of a screenshot of what we're looking in the viewport now. Then it will take the image to Photoshop, and there will let us paint whatever we need, and then save that file, export it to ZBrush, and map it over our geometry. Okay, we'll do this so you can see it's how it works. I'm clicking on Sapling now. I'm gonna leave the parameters here just like they are, and I'll click on Drop Now. Automatically it will open Photoshop, and it will open a scene of a new file in Photoshop with these three layers down here. There's first layer, it's going to give us the shading information. This next one, the second one, it's the one that contains the texture and the projection of it on the geometry. And this third layer you don't have to touch it. You have to remember that very well, that you don't have to touch this one. And the next thing that I'm gonna do, it's very simple. I'll just grab some of the photographs I have here in my references, just like this one, in which we can see the cap detail here. As simple as it sounds, I'm just gonna cut here the cap from the melon. Let's work with this area, and I'm gonna paste it here in the file that ZBrush put in Photoshop, and I'm gonna move it around, scale it so it fits as best as possible. That's why I said I wasn't very much worried about the stretching that we have here. This technique is very useful for correcting this kind of stretchings, but at the end the right thing is to have this without it from the beginning, but it's a good option. Now I'm gonna put the cap here, and I'm gonna erase a little of here, down here, so we can make a better integration with the underlaying texture we have. Okay, now what we're gonna do is make a merge of these two layers here, and I'll tell Photoshop that I want to maintain the mask that has already came with a file. So now, as you can see, we have a new texture, a new set of data that it came from the ZBrush file, and now we're just simply gonna save this file here in Photoshop. Once we save, we just get back to ZBrush, and the plugin will ask if we really want to get back to ZBrush or we want to keep working on the external editor. And then we're gonna click here on Pick Up Now, and we'll get the final result of the texture here mapped on the geometry. So as you can see, it's a very simple technique, and it's very useful for making all this kind of details. Otherwise, this process would be very, very difficult. You can see here that ZBrush creates a new texture for us, and I'm gonna click here on Clone Texture, so we can get the texture be used by ZBrush. You can see now it's in this part of the software, in which we can export it to any format we would like to, or whatever we might need. I hope you find this technique as useful. I use it a lot on making strange or very complicated things on my textures. Okay, so I'll close ZBrush here. I'm gonna also close these files from Photoshop that I don't need them anymore. And now I'm gonna substitute this texture for the other one we had. Oops. With our details painted over. As you can see, this would be almost impossible to paint in Photoshop. And mainly because I don't see any kind of seam here in my texture, and as you can see, I put it just wherever I like it. I'll make a new render to see how it looks now. And from this distance, I think we get a very, very decent result on what would look like a texture for a melon. Well, now that we've been taking care of this part of the process, now we have to be very careful with the actual surface of the melon. One of the things that we should take a very close look, well, maybe in this photograph it's not very clear, but let's see, maybe in this one it's very, very clear that the texture has some bump on it. And of course I would like to have this kind of bump here in my image. It would give a very nice result and give more the information to the viewer. So I won't take much of attention here in this process, mainly because the fruit is not close to the camera. In fact, none of the fruits are in an extreme foreground. Of course, it's not the kind of job I would do in a product shot, for example, that has fruits on it, and that it's a very foreground, it's very first plane image. But it would be nice to have this information. The process will be very simple, in fact. I'm just gonna open Photoshop again. And working with the texture we got from ZBrush, I'm gonna open it and just convert it to black and white values. The first thing we need to understand about a texture that is going to be applied on the bump map is that it works only with black and white information. I know almost everybody should know this, but sometimes we can get confused, and the simplest thing that I can remember is that white means yes and black means no. So translating this to a bump map, yes means that we're gonna have some bump on the texture, and black means that we're not gonna have bump on this part. So once we convert this texture to black and white, we can make a mental image if this is gonna be work okay. So looking at the image, I think it's gonna work pretty well. We can see that this white part is gonna be bumped, and well, we can maybe refine this working here with levels and give it a little bit more contrast, or taking it a little less contrast also to the image. So now back on the 3D program, we're gonna fire up some bump texture. Well, and now we're gonna pre-visualize it in the viewer here in the material editor, and it seems that it's gonna be work pretty well for this image. And well, you can see that the result, you can see here it's pretty decent for this kind of fruit, but I think we can put a little bit more bump here. So a little bit more could do something nice. A little bit, maybe around something like 60. I'll move the viewport a little bit so we can see another angle, and I think the texture works pretty nice on what we'll be doing with it. Well, now having solved the surface of the fruit, we can now step on to the shading things now. For this matter, I'm gonna show you an image here that I would like that you to see, so I can explain a little bit better what we're gonna do on shading. This technique, well, this solution, it's very important and very simple, and well, for me it's the most important thing on shading, and we're gonna talk about reflection on the materials. If you take a look around, almost every object you can see will have some amount of reflection. It might be very subtle, but I'm pretty sure that it will have some kind of reflection. You'll notice that there are more objects that have reflection than those that you can identify that doesn't have any reflection at all. In the San Juan image, all of the objects have an amount of reflection, every object. Very few of them doesn't have any reflection, and I can name them. It's, for example, like the wood here, and the cardboard over here too. In this case too, the melon, because its surface it's very matte. And I think those are the ones that I can say that doesn't have any value of reflection or specularity. And as you can see, most of the objects have some kind of reflection on them. If you really consider the importance of the reflection, you'll notice that in the shading you'll get a lot of more detail on your scenes. The next thing will be to understand how the reflection and the specular value affects the object. And this is very related with the glossiness value of the surface. An easy way to explain what this is by looking this object here. This teapot has very clear reflection of the light source, and in this other one you can't really see it very well defined. If you can notice in these two objects, the combination of these two objects, these parameters, the degree of the reflection and the degree of glossiness will be will be having a lot will have a lot of quantity of materials in combination of these two values. So the next parameter, well, the first one was the reflection and the glossiness, but the second one would be how much light the object absorbs. So when we're talking about food and fruits and organic things, a lot of times light is absorbed by the object. Let's think, for example, with a tomato, or how about if we think in a lettuce. And for sure we'll notice that these objects absorb an amount of light. In my scene, I really didn't use this phenomenon because none of the objects are close enough to the camera to get this kind of detail. In fact, we're not gonna talk about any kind of SSS or subsurface scattering in the process. So the whole shading in the scene, it's based on how much reflection it had and how glossy the surface was. In the case of the melon, we can look in the references that it's almost absent the amount of reflection that it has. So there was not really much intention to put work on the specularity and the reflection levels of this object. On a V-Ray material, and I must say now that all the objects on the scene are using V-Ray materials. The reflection amount of shader, it's again based on a black and white value. Translating it again, it's white, yes, reflection, will have reflection, black, we won't have reflection, and as you can see, the default, it's on no reflection here. If we move the value, you can see some kind of update here in the viewport, but at this point we don't want. The next value we'll be playing with is the glossiness, and as you can see, the value here it's 1. This means that the reflection will be very precise, a lot like in this image. And as I go down closer to 0, the phenomenon we're gonna get is this one, like it's getting, the reflection will get blurry. So as we talked before, we don't want any kind of reflection in this shader, so we're gonna leave it just in black and in 1. Now to look a little bit something more interesting in the shading part, I'm gonna to unhide all the objects I have here. And now you can see that I have here in this scene all my fruits, all my vegetables that are gonna be in the scene, and well, I review them all with this illumination set. Okay, now just to make something interesting, I'm gonna test the watermelon shader on this same geometry here. Here I have the watermelon shader now. I'm just gonna apply it to the object. I'm gonna explain a little bit how the texture came out, and as you can see, it's almost the same technique that we used before. It has the same mapping as the melon. In fact, it was the watermelon with the melon texture. I just went to Photoshop, extend the texture, and in this case I didn't have to put any kind of cap like in the melon. Now I'll open a reference from the melon, sorry, the watermelon. The first thing we're gonna notice is that in this object we do have amount of reflection and glossiness. That it's very noticeable, not like in the melon. And here we can see specularity and reflection. And these kind of images make me put more attention on the work I did on the reflection in this fruit. I notice in most of the pictures that the specular in the object it's not perfect. It looks like regular, like dirty, and of course this give it a lot of attitude. And I wanted to replicate this in 3D. And my main reference will be this image. I'm gonna take it here to my second monitor, and I'm gonna isolate my selection here that it's my watermelon in my viewport. If you look at my shader of the watermelon, one of the things that I changed is just the texture, the diffuse texture here, that it's the texture we painted. And then I added a little bit of reflection by moving this parameter a little bit more closer to white. And now I'll make a render here so you can look at the shading that has this watermelon now. And as you can see, we can look at the reflection of the V-Ray light that I'm using here. And this is not what we're looking for. And the easiest way to solve this is to put a texture in the reflection slot here. Or also we can put it in the glossy slot here. Again, white will be very glossy. Black will take it the glossiness to less values. And as you can see, this is exactly what is happening here in the image. There are areas where it's a lot of glossiness and other areas don't have that much glossiness. So this solution will be to just drop here a map. So let me take a look for this texture map. Just some kind of map that could give me this kind of effect. So I just picked up this texture map that I took from internet. In fact, it's a concrete map that makes some kind of sense because it looked a lot like what I was aiming for in the reference image we saw before. Now I'll make a render with this new texture applied in the glossiness map, and as you can see, it's very close to the reference image we were looking. So as you can see, we're very close. Maybe the image has a little bit more saturated colors, and maybe the glossiness values are bigger or higher, but we're very close. This image gave us a very nice variation on the glossiness values. And let me take another render here. Now this size looks good, and well, this is a technique I use for all of the fruits I used in the scene. Just like the melon, some of them didn't need it, like the melon again, like the peach, or also like here like the mango. I want to point out that let's see the mango here, the material of the mango, and I'm gonna say that the mango and the peach are the only two objects that don't have V-Ray materials. And why? Because I really like this ordinary plane shader that we have in the standard material, because it generates very diffuse glossiness and this hairy texture on the surface. Besides from them, all the materials are V-Ray materials, and the only things that changes is the diffuse texture map and how much reflection and the texture map that controls the glossiness. Well, I hope the techniques I showed and the tips I gave you are useful for your further images, and see you in the next video.